Welcome back to another episode of Tips and Tricks for Writing Fics. This is episode 2, and we're going to be looking at building the story in this episode. Basically what I mean is getting your plot points together, working out what's going to happen to your characters, the kind of changes and experiences that they're going to be having throughout your plot line, and better ways to see that your characters to stay true to form, but still are altered by what you put them through. As I mentioned before in my manuscript videos, you're basically God when you're a writer. So you need to take care of what you put on your characters and how you weave your story to make sure that you write something that's successful. And then by successful, I mean you have readers who want to come back and read your next installment. So in building the story, it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort just brainstorming to get your plot together, to get the important plot points arranged in a way that it works for you, but will also work for your readers, because your readers are going to be picky. When it comes to fan fiction, it seems like the fan base is so polarized. You're going to get those people who really adore what you do, and then you're going to get the people who really just can't stand it. And you're going to have to learn to take both those in stride. That's something I can't really teach you to do, but it's something you learn as you go. Hopefully most of you will have the sensible fans that will appreciate what you do, but also be able to offer you corrective and constructive criticism. Hopefully you won't have to encounter many of those people that just scream and complain to scream and complain. But one of the best ways to handle those is just take it in stride. Always be the bigger person. Be humble and gracious and accepting of praise and criticism alike. Unless you know for a fact that it's just someone trying to feed you bullshit, then still be the bigger person, but either ignore them completely or just tell them off with grace. That's always been my kind of rule of thumb. You're not going to be able to please everybody, and don't feel bad if you can't, because that's just how it is. Okay, so let's actually get started on the tips that I want to cover. Subject matter, it's really going to depend on what canon you're choosing, what properties that you're working with. But depending on the subject matter, while you're working out your plot, while you're brainstorming what you want to happen in the story, ask yourself, could this happen? Not so much that you're limiting yourself to what is fantasy and what is reality, but ask if in this universe and these properties that you're using, is this likely? Could this happen? Could this occur? Could this be believable to the characters you're working with? So, and I found that plot points that could be more likely is better received by your readers. If it's something that they don't have to stretch too hard to accept in their imagination, then I find that it's a lot easier for them to read. It's something that they can quickly grab onto and appreciate early on. Good examples, like if you're bringing in a new villain to the canon you're working with, it's good to take a really deep look into your properties and see if there is some way that this villain, he or she, could come out of. Because a lot of fan fictions, they tend to bring in new villains out of left field. They try to make them as obscure as possible, I guess, to make it easier for themselves to create them, because there's less expectations from the reader to follow a certain frame, I suppose you could say. But excuse me, allergies. Obscure villains work, but the more applicable they are to your canons and your properties that you're using, I think the more life your villain is going to have. So, but that can also account for new heroes and new characters that, that kind of fit the middle of the road. If they fit in the basis of your canon, then chances are your readers are going to be a lot better at receiving them. They're really going to they're going to believe them more. They're going to see them as more part of the complete picture instead of an additional additive. That's kind of redundant, but you see what I'm saying. So study your property really carefully, and when you're planning new characters or new plot points, see if there is a way that this could be factual for your characters, if this could be a likely scenario. It's going to be easier for you, and I think it's going to be a little bit easier for your readers to grasp. So So there's just take that into consideration when you're creating your plot. Is just try and decide, you know, is this too far of a stretch, or is this right at home where I need to be? Of course, that depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell. So use your discretion, use your gut, and see what you can come up with, and just keep it in mind when you're weaving your plot. No, don't be afraid to expand where the canon leaves off, especially in video games or books. Those of us who take into that to appreciate that sometimes we're not too happy with how something ends. I am guilty of that so many times, especially with the 13 saga as it's been told so far. To be continued is like dirty words to me. You can't tell me that and expect me to be happy. So that's where Lords of Chaos came from. That's where Blood Tithe came from. It's just dissatisfaction where something left off. And I'm sure a lot of fan fiction writers are the same way. They're dissatisfied with how something is presented to them or how something is completed. So they go on this personal crusade to right the wrongs and finish the story and, you know, fill in the holes or create holes of their own, whichever fits you. But never be afraid to expand on what's canon. I'll be covering more of that in a future episode with alternate universes and altered universes. So, but just kind of to touch on it right now, canon is not canon is a sacred cow, and sacred cows make the best burgers. Don't be afraid to take what is and to change it. That's kind of one of literature's greatest advantages. Is it takes, in many forms, such as comics and manga and so on and so forth, in many forms, literature is the spearhead for change in the public consciousness. At least that's how I think. So, so yeah, just don't tread too carefully. It's okay to take what, especially if you're in fan fiction, that's what you do on a regular basis if you're an avid fan fiction writer, is you take what it is and you change it, and you expand it, or you condense it, or you change it somehow. You're constantly changing things that are. So don't be afraid to do that. Literature should not procure fear from the writer. You know, take your chances. If you feel like it's a big chance, just take it. Yeah, you can fail, you can fall flat on your face, but that's not what this is about, is it? It's about expressing your inner thoughts and seeing what you can do when you're given total control. So yeah, just no fear, and just keep your focus. Be sure to stay, you know, try and keep true to the canon, but have some fun with it. When contemplating dialogue, here's another thing that I tend to notice a lot in fanfiction particularly, is sometimes the dialogue really fails, where the storytelling and the narrative really shines, and I think it's kind of tragic. But over my many years of writing, I've found some tips to kind of avoid weak dialogue, and one of it, especially with naturally, when fan fiction, you're going to have a lot of popular characters, and your readers are going to have expectations about what these characters do, what they act like, what they sound like, how they word things, their vernacular, especially if like they have an accent or whatever. Say it out loud. After you've written some dialogue, just pause for a few minutes, read it over, and then read it out loud to yourself to see how it sounds. If a character has an accent, try and use their voice. Try and use their accent and try and mimic their voice. Male, female, whichever. Just have the conversation with yourself. Say it out loud. See how it sounds to you. And if it flows, you're on the right track. And if you notice a little hiccup, try and fix it. Because you got to think, this is what your reader is going to hear. Your reader is going to, chances are, is going to make this sound in their head exactly as you say it to yourself. That's a habit I've gotten into mostly recently, but I've found it to be a real time saver and shame saver for me personally, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so if I notice something's wrong, I get kind of bent about it. But if I read the dialogue in the characters' voices, then I find out, sometimes I can stop myself and say, hey, this doesn't really sound right. This doesn't sound like something they would say. or this word doesn't really sound right for the way they talk. Then I can go back and I can fix it before I publish it, and then I kind of save myself the shame fest, because I am a self-flagellator of the highest degree. So yeah, I just wrote an introduction for this fan fiction I've been working on, well, at least thinking of working on. And I wrote the intro, and most of it is dialogue and internal thoughts, internal monologue. And I read it all, changing through accents to myself, and I realized, okay, this is pretty good. But it was also a great opportunity for me to find any mistakes. So get in the habit of that, especially if you're doing fan fiction. I mean, it still works when you're doing your own original manuscript, but it is vital when you're working with fan fiction, because your readers have expectations. And some of them you have no choice but to meet, or else no one's going to want to read your stuff. It's just, it's a fact of things. Fan fiction carries rules and limits that you have to meet in order for your readers to want to come back. So keep that in mind. Just take a few minutes and read your dialogue out loud, and have some fun with voices, and just kind of entertain yourself and see if how that feels for you. It's not going to work for everybody. It works for me, and it's at least something to try. Use the canon history if you can. Certain games in particular, or really big literary sagas like Lord of the Rings, they have a rich history that just spans millennia, if not just ages and ages before the events of the story, that you can dip into and use to your advantage. Legend of Dragoon is a fairly appropriate example for video games, because you've got, I believe it's like 10,000, 11,000 years of time between the beginning of the story and the events of the game. So you can research that and see, you know, how has the world changed, what great events did the world encounter during that time period. And then you have Lord of the Rings. You have the birth of Sauron, the Silmarillion, and the history leading up to, you know, Smaug's appearance at Lonely Mountain, or the Wraith's appearance at the Shire. So if you can use that to better build your story, or to better validate some of the events that occur, go for it. It'll be more believable for your readers, and it'll be easier for them to accept it, and it really gives your story depth when you can, you know, add weight to its validity, to the validity of the events that you put your characters through. So if you can, look into the research. Pick and choose elements from the history that works for you, and make sure that you got it down. Make sure it fits. Don't force fit it. Don't, you know, take a pair of scissors to the puzzle piece to make it fit. Make sure it works. Test it. Run it by a friend. Run it by someone you trust, or if you have a proofreader, run it by them, or just say it to yourself. Write it out in some narrative and see how that works for you. So with fanfiction, you have all the time in the world to test run your stuff before you publish it. You don't have any deadlines or anything like that. So take all the time you need to test drive your plot elements, especially if they're kind of a stretch. So you're going to want to nurture those as best you can. And if you can't make it fit, don't make it fit. Learn to cut your losses, and to, you know, just to turn away from bad ideas. And that's mostly going to be a gut thing. So just trust your gut and see what you can come up with, but do your best to use the history to your advantage. Let's see. Here's another thing I've seen a lot in fan fiction, is they'll take the writer will take a loved character, especially a main character, one that's almost been deified, you know, made to seem like 10 feet tall and bulletproof, and they'll make them encounter a tragic event, such as severe injury or trauma, or the loss of someone they care about extremely. I'm not against it. Obviously, I'm not against it if you've read anything I've written, especially Blood Tithe. I am not against tearing down main characters a few pegs and making them look as human as possible. In fact, I think that's one of my great talents, is torturing innocent people. So I'm not going to caution you against it. However, I'm going to caution you at how you do it. A lot of fan fiction is going to be about how you do it, since you're not really changing much as far as characters and terrain, you know, where things take place and whatnot. You need to be extremely careful with how you do things, because that's what's going to make your work unique against everybody else's. But it can also make or break you. I've seen main characters losing limbs. I've seen them losing loved ones, the brothers, sisters, wives, husbands, so on and so forth. There is a way to do it. And the best way I think you can learn to do it properly is research people, and don't overdo it. There is don't ham it up too much with tragic events, especially like losing limbs. That comparatively to some of the other things that could happen to someone, losing a limb is something you can learn to work and live with. So I'd have to say that's the lesser of the two. But losing a loved one, yes, there is a way that you could still, even then, as tragic as that can be, there is a way to overdo it. It's when they just lean on it and use it as a crutch, 24/7, and it's constantly part of their behavior and thought process that I think will tire out your reader and make them seem kind of whiny, I guess, in a way. So use discretion. Find a balance of where they mourn, where they feel the pain, where they encounter their new shortcomings and their disabilities. They research people and use your discretion, because there is such thing as overdoing it. And you should take care of that, because it could turn off a reader just like that. It's done it to me. I'm sure I've done it to some of my readers. So try and avoid that. Just find a happy balance. With fan fiction, a lot of it is going to be about finding a happy balance and finding what your readers best respond to. I think a really good example of not overdoing it, in my own experience, was when I wrote Feral. Fang was an alcoholic. At least she didn't want to admit she was an alcoholic, but she had many, if not all, the symptoms of an alcoholic. Denial, binge drinking, functioning while drunk, and drinking on the job, and drinking before the job, drinking after the job. And she had her reasons why. And I chose a time and place instinctually to expose why she drinks and when she drinks. And it wasn't a constant presence, because I also subtly dropped her gradually getting off the drink because of Lightning's presence in the home. So there is a way to pull off vices, habits, I just lost my train of thought. Vices, habits, addictions, painful memories, loss of a loved one, loss of a limb. There is a balance, and you just got to find it, and everybody's is going to be different, and you're still going to get some flack for how you do it, or if you do it at all, because I kind of did on occasion. So expect the fireworks, the good and the bad. So, but quick recap. Pardon my fumble. Depending on the subject matter, ask yourself if the events you've come up with so far are likely. Would they fit in this universe? Don't be afraid to expand where the canon leaves off. That's some of the greatest fodder ever for fan fiction writers, is where the original story leaves off, and what can you do to continue it. When contemplating dialogue or writing dialogue, pause for a few minutes, read it over out loud. Try and use the characters' voices. Another tip is with fanfiction, if you're about to go into a long string of dialogue, such as expose through speaking, try and make it clear who's talking before you actually get to the dialogue. That way that you can save yourself time from tedious name usage. Because some people get overloaded when you use the name too much. So you're going to want to minimize that and make it clear who's talking to who before you get into a long string of dialogue. Just a thought. Use the canon history to your advantage if you're able to. If there is a if there's a good supply of historical content for your property, give it a glance. See if there's anything that you can use to validate your plot. And if it's a lot of history, just kind of peruse it until you find exactly what you need if you're looking for something in particular. Or if you're just really interested, go ahead and read it all. It couldn't hurt you. And finally, take care when presenting trauma and tragedy to your characters, especially canon characters. Yes, events like that will change them to a degree. Whether it's permanent or not is up to you. However, you need to take care to try and do your best to keep those canon characters in their original form, in the form that the fans know and love best. Yes, you can add your own personal quirks due to whatever it is you've brought down on their heads, but in the end, they still need to try and retain their original personality. So just take some care with that. So that's pretty much all I got on building a story for fan fictions. Next episode, we'll be covering original characters. Some of you are probably going to get really excited about this because I've made a lot of original characters, but I've also made a lot of mistakes, and hopefully I'm going to be able to give you some tips on how to avoid my mistakes. Also, real quick, for some of my current fans, I got a little bit of news as far as Fang and Lightning content. I have decided to cut the one-shot, The Pact, that I spoke about in my Ask the Author video for the Fanfiction 13. That's not going to happen now. I did some artwork for it, but I also lost a lot of steam on the idea, and I just decided I'm going to cut it loose. However, there's still some good news. I mentioned in author's notes for 13 that my muse was trying to force me to write a sequel before the original was done. And she kind of succeeded, only that I am going to write a sequel, but not until after Lords of Chaos is finished. I don't know if it's going to come before or after Blood from the Stone, possibly after. It depends on when I can get the physical material together. I want to get the Fatal Attractions saga in physical form so I can actually read it over and see what I can draw from it. But yes. There will be a sequel to 13. Again, it will be a X-Men Marvel Universe AU titled Fatal Attractions. We'll be discussing mostly what changes Lightning's going through now that the mutation is actually active. I'm sure some of you are excited to hear about that. Yes, she's going to change into a Lassie, but as far as the events that cause this, I'm not telling. So hopefully that'll get you a little bit excited. I do have a intro written and ready to post. I'll be posting it on DeviantArt real shortly. So hopefully you guys will find time to take a look and go over to luckyfirerabbit.deviantart.com and check the fanfiction section of my gallery, and it should be in there real soon. So yeah, thank you for joining me for episode 2, building a story of tips and tricks for fanfics. And in episode 3, we're going to be discussing original characters. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon. If there was anything I didn't cover, or you still have a question, please leave it in the comments, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Catch you on the flip side.